Hello, hello, freedom fighters. Can everyone hear me okay and see me okay? Type in the chat and let me know. We've got special guest Goro here tonight joining us. Hello, Goro, and welcome.
Hey, Christina, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. Welcome to the show. Very excited. We've got an interesting topic, all to do with property, as we normally are on this show. But Goro, now you specialise in NDIS.
That's right. So, more specifically, specialist disability accommodation.
Mhm.
So, people call it NDIS, but it's actually SDA, which is only a small subset of people on the NDIS.
Right. And I have to ask, what does the NDIS stand for?
The NDIS stand for National Disability Insurance Scheme, and
Okay.
SDA stands for Specialist Disability Accommodation. So, when people are talking about property in NDIS, they're really talking about specialist disability accommodation.
Right, I see. And now's a good opportunity to get your questions in nice and early because we've only got a short time here together tonight. So we want to make sure we answer as many of your questions as possible. But it was really interesting because I don't know if all of you know, but I'm actually streaming from India. And Goro, you mentioned.
Yes, we've switched places. We have the Indian in Australia and the Aussie in India. Like, how does that work? We switched
That's
places.
hilarious. I thought that was so funny. So, yeah, coming to you live from India. And that's the beauty of technology, really. You know, you can be in Australia and connect. I can be in India. And it's still like we're basically sitting across from each other, just, having a nice little chat.
Yeah, I love
Fantastic. Awesome. Yep. So we are discussing the top 5 things to know about NDIS. So, Goro, I'll let you take the floor and start with your number one thing out of those 5 that everyone should know about NDIS because it's a fascinating thing, and I often hear the word bounced around. And I think there's a lot of preconceived ideas about how it might be like easy to make money or, there's different things involved. And I really want to get like the inside scoop from you here tonight.
yeah. Well, in summary, it's complicated, right? That's
Yeah.
the easiest way for me to explain it. Just really briefly about my background. Those that haven't watched previous webinars that George and I have done together over the last 7 years, I've delved right deep into NDIS, and 80 to 90% of the work I do in the property space is all NDIS based in terms of specialist disability accommodation. And I also own Victoria's largest privately owned accommodation provider for people on the NDIS. That's a specialist disability accommodation provider known as Empowered Livability. And we were one of the first privately owned organizations ever to build the NDIS for SDA ever, right?
Wow.
So
Fantastic.
this this is the background before people go into it, because there's going
Mm.
to be some stuff that people go, yeah, that's cool, I understand, and some stuff that you and I are going to share that they go, holy crap, we didn't know it was like that. And
Mm.
in a nutshell, the number one thing that people should know, if done the wrong way, it's probably going to be one of your worst mistakes ever in terms of property. But if done the right way, it could be one of your most profitable ventures, right?
Mm.
There's a
Okay.
risk reward, and it's definitely not recommended for a first time investor.
Hmm. Yeah, really glad you mentioned that because often a lot of people get confused and they think, oh, something looks awesome, it's going to be simple, but there's never a straight line to success. Everything always takes a lot of due diligence, hard work, and there's usually that barrier to entry, which brings me to my question. On average, what sort of a deposit do you need to get started with NDIS?
Well, it's changed a lot since our last podcast that we had, or last live that we did. Um, it used to be 30% plus, but now we're
Mm,
seeing anywhere from 15 to 20% deposits plus stamp duty, where there's
wow.
lenders that are now SDA specific that will allow us to borrow. But obviously, not all lenders will do it. There are only some lenders. That's why you need to go to a good broker to find that kind of lender that will allow you to borrow. But yeah, that's
Right.
all 15 to 20%.
Okay, so from a dollar perspective, what's a typical cost of one of these houses?
Every location is different, but we find most properties range from that 750 all the way to 1.3 million, depending on what we're buying, how much income we want to get.
Mm-hmm.
So
So if
20%,
we're averaging, yeah,
yeah,
let's say $1 million. Let's go and meet in the
$10
middle.
million, and you need about 250 access to about 250k
Wow. Yeah.
in
So that's
equity
a
or
lot of money you need to
yeah,
get started with one of these projects. So I can see why you're saying, you want to have a few like bread and butter, simple sort of mum and dad investment properties under your belt so you can learn the ropes and know what you're doing, and
that's
then tackle the larger, bigger whales, I guess, like NDIS investment,
yeah,
because you need a considerable deposit to even get started.
that's right, that's right.
Yeah, interesting. And you
Not for
mentioned
beginners.
obviously there's a bit of a risk involved. If we can just open up that can of worms a little bit more and explore what that means, what sort of risks are we talking about when it comes to this investing?
Well, if someone's trying to sell you a property and it's an NDIS property and that's what their focus is,
Yeah,
you're buying from the wrong person, right?
right.
There are only there are only very few NDIS tenants, and I've actually got. If you bear with me, I've got the data here, and that'll back up. There's a
Yeah,
reason why I'm about to say what I'm about to say, and I really want to be data backed, right? Because data
absolutely.
will allow us to make the right decision. So people think there's hundreds of thousands of people with the funding. There's actually very few, right? So according to 2022 August data, sorry,
Mhm.
end of 22 data, in New South Wales, there was only 7,300 residents with the funding. Victoria,
Yep.
there's only 6,600 at the moment. That's about 7,100, by the way. Queensland,
Mhm.
3,400 across all of Queensland, right? South Australia, your home state, right? We're talking about 2,500 participants with the funding. So the
Mhm.
funding is quite limited and it's only for a certain
Mhm.
amount of people, right?
Right.
That being said, if you're building a house and there's 50 other houses with SDA close by, which is one of the risks when you're buying from just a pure sales agent who doesn't have the participants' best interests in mind, then you're not going to fill the house and you're not going to get any money. There is no income if the house is empty. I don't care what rental
Mhm.
guarantee someone's trying to give you, it's not even
Yeah.
worth the paper it's written on.
You need a tenant paying you the rent to get the income, right?
Well, you need the tenant in the house and then the government funds the rent effectively.
Right. So you've really got two pillars there, not
Yes.
just the one. Yep. Yep. Okay.
That's right.
And
And so you need to deal with a reputed SDA provider
mhm.
in the middle and not just a sales agency that's trying to sell you the property. That is the key. Do your due diligence on the provider first rather than who's trying to sell you the property.
Got it. You've actually covered one of my questions, which was around, how does the NDIS funding model work? What are the
Mhm,
key factors that impact an investment decision within this framework? So
mhm.
you've mentioned a really good point that it's very limited. Is there like a criteria that you have to
Yes.
meet for the government to be able to go, okay, you've got my stamp of approval. Now we're going to make sure that you've got properties that meet our standards so they're compliant. Therefore, you get the government
Yeah.
incentives.
So there's two things. Number one, the participant has to have a certain level of disability, which is they have to have what they call complex needs, right?
Right.
Whether that's physical or psychosocial. We
Mhm,
in general don't like the psychosocial or what they call robust in general to deal with.
mhm.
There are some concerns there. That's a can of worms that'll take a few hours to explain. But it
Yeah,
basically, in a nutshell, robust isn't suitable at the moment for most investors. That's why
right.
even funds, because I do work with quite a few funds like Macquarie Bank, and the like there.
Mhm,
Um, even they say don't bring us robust properties, and there's a reason. If a fund's saying don't bring us these properties, why
mm,
should you, as a mum and dad investor, invest in those properties, right?
mhm.
That's number one. But the other thing is, so the participant needs the funding, then the house needs to be compliant. Now, here's the other risk. There's another point I want to bring up. A lot of people go, "Oh, the house is compliant. It should be
Mm,
able to get people with disabilities in there." It might be compliant, but it's not functional, right?
right.
You need
So
to have
there's 2
something.
different boxes that need to be ticked.
Not only two different boxes that need to be ticked, but we need to go over and above the ticking, is what I'm trying to get through.
Mhm.
Because if you just do the bare minimum, I mean, Christina, let me ask you a question. Do you enjoy living in the bare minimum hotel room, 2-star hotel room, or do you like living in a 4 or 5-star hotel room?
Oh, look, it's gotta be up there, absolutely.
The
It's got to
two-star
be
comply
5 stars.
with a hotel room. Guess what? And that's what's happening in the industry right now.
Wow.
People are buying properties saying they comply because the builders say they comply, and it's the
Mhm.
equivalent of a two-star hotel room. Why would
Wow.
you
That's
give
shocking.
someone that, from an ethical point of view, why would
Yeah.
you have someone with a disability spend their lives in inferior accommodation?
Mm. So just to build on that, that understanding, how would you know the difference between like a 2-star NDIS versus a 5-star? And obviously, the 5-star is going to be higher quality. It's going to have
Yes.
more care, better
It's
craftsmanship, better workmanship.
going to cost more to build.
I was going to say it's obviously going to be more expensive
Yeah.
because you get what you pay for, right?
Yes, that's right. So, for example, when we work with builders, we only do custom build, right? We do
Right.
not. Well, like honestly, this is not a volume builder play. So, if you're dealing with someone that deals with a volume builder that does 50 other building types, it's probably
Mhm.
not the right thing. There are SDA providers. It's just a matter of I see a question there. The SDA provide basically how do we find the right type of build? If
Mhm.
someone's selling to you, ask who the SDA provider is and call the SDA provider going, I'm talking to this and this person. Are
Mhm.
they building to your standard where you know you can tenant the house?
Yeah.
Right? The
Mhm.
SDA provider is basically like the property manager. If the property manager doesn't like the house, the builder can build whatever they want because it complies to standard.
Got it. We've had a few questions come through. Left field question: what happens if an incoming new government comes in and scraps the NDIS program? What happens then?
I really like that question because I get that question all the time. So, a
Mm.
couple of things. NDIS is supported by both sides of politics, and it's not scrapping the NDIS. There's no way that it's not an easy way to scrap a whole disability system for over 500,000 Australians, right?
Yeah.
They could taper it off, but the way accommodation would work is, and there's already grandfathering agreements for other types of accommodation. We know we had a thing called NRAS a while ago, and that got grandfathered out. Now, in order to do that, there's a 20-year. Your house is compliant for 20 years. If they want to turn off the tap, they'll stop approving more residents, but they can't stop the funding of existing residents.
Of
Imagine
course.
the government trying to make residents homeless. That's what would happen. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's not gonna happen, and look, I know the shadow minister of NDIS. He's a good friend of mine.
Mhm.
He's also, he's from the Liberal Party. He also opened up one of our houses, so we know him really well. He is fully in support of NDIS,
Mhm.
um, and I'd say both sides of politics at the moment really support the NDIS in various shapes.
Yeah, it would have a catastrophic outcome if they were. And obviously, let's say worst case scenario, even if they did, like you said, there'd be a grandfather period. It wouldn't just be overnight, bang, no more, done,
Yeah.
finished forever. It would be like a 20-year rollout.
Yes.
But I can't imagine the government ever doing that because
Yeah.
number one, it wouldn't be productive to society. Number two, like you said, we don't want homeless people.
Yes.
Absolutely not. That's not going to help society. It's not going to help Australia as a whole. It's going to cause a whole host of other problems. Which why would they do that? It's just not common sense. But
Exactly.
you know,
Half a
common
million
sense is not
Australians.
common. So you never know, right?
Yeah. Exactly. There's
And
some
you've obviously mentioned STA quite a bit, Goro, but for those who have just recently joined us, we've got a few people going, what's STA? What's SDA?
Yeah.
If you
So
want to just
I meant to. So it may sound with my accent, I'm saying T, but I mean D. Sorry, there is a thing called short-term accommodation. I'm not going to cover that. That's another can of worms.
that's another
We're
topic for another
focusing on
day.
specialist disability accommodation. That's SDA.
DA,
Yes.
specialist
Right.
disability accommodation. There
Yes.
you go.
Yep. And
Fantastic.
every state has good SDA providers. Don't just go with, do your due diligence. Find out who the directors of the SDA provider are. Find out who the
Mhm,
directors of the company that's trying to sell you the property are. Do
mhm.
that level of due diligence because honestly, it's not like buying an empty property. Industry vacancy rates. This is gonna shock some people. Actually, Christina, do you know what the industry vacancy rate is
Let me
in
have a
SDA
guess.
at the moment?
I'm just gonna throw a ballpark figure out there, and I've got no idea, but is it 50%?
it's 30 to 50%. You're on the ball, right?
Wow,
And
there you
so
go.
this is the thing with overdevelopment by volume builders who have built the houses in the wrong locations. This is could be, this is the issue.
Wow. And
You
that's a
need to
supply
build
and
a
demand
bespoke.
issue. So they're building the properties in the wrong areas. Is that as
Yeah,
simple what it comes down to?
yeah. I mean, for example, I'll give you a Melbourne example.
Yeah.
In the suburb of Wyndham Vale, Tarneit, Melton, these areas, I know one particular builder that's built like 10 on every street, right?
Wow.
Those houses are never going to be filled because A, they're, part of my French, but they're pretty shit. Um,
They're the 2-star
yeah,
standard.
they're two-star, and they're built for psychosocial disabilities, so they also ruin
Right.
the neighborhood when you put 10 of those right next to each other. Um, that's not really, I think that's really unethical what they've done,
Mm, mm.
and unfortunately, the investors have lost out. They've been on the news recently
Wow.
because of that. And so you really need to deal with almost like a company that's more participant focused. And my hashtag in life, in what I do with anything in business, is do good and make money. Right.
Mm,
So
mm.
do good. Focus on the participant first. What's going to be the best for the participant? Find a company that focuses on that, and then you'll make profit, right? Between my dad and I, we own over 13 of these, and we're still building more personally that we're owning ourselves in various structures, etc. Right? So this is still for us something that we continue to invest in. Yes, the vacancy rate industry-wise might be 30 to 50%, but as a company, we have zero vacant houses.
Mm.
As it is, that's the difference between a bad SDA provider and a good SDA provider. 0% vacancy versus 50% vacancy.
Yeah, wow. It's like
Yeah,
night and day. I'm just shocked at those statistics.
yeah.
That is
It-
crazy. And it's fascinating to hear about the difference in quality. Like, there's so many nuances, and you really want to make sure that when you do something, you want to get it right and make sure that, you've got all of that figured out ahead of time because that's so important. So I think we've got about time for one more of your points, Goro. We might have to come back and do a part two.
we might. We might.
Absolutely.
So I mean, I've covered so much here. And look, Charmaine's actually got a really good question.
Absolutely.
Um,
What's your next question?
I reckon let's answer that. NDIS have got good rentals, but what about capital growth? Now, the way we look at capital growth is a combination of commercial and residential,
Yes.
right? I don't like this is almost like a a commercial property in a residential shell. That's how I look at it. That's how I
Right.
look at
It's a
my
bit of a
property.
spork. It's a
But
spoon and a fork.
yeah, it's a spork, right?
It's a spork.
It's a spork, right? Um,
Commercial
but
and residential. Like,
yeah, I
I
mean,
didn't know that
I've
that
been
could exist.
when we first created this, we were looking for commercial returns on residential property. Those that invest in
Right.
commercial know that you get paid more, right? Now,
Mm,
if now I can only speak about what we do. I can't speak about what others do, right? In terms
mm.
of growth, we find our properties are underpriced commercially. Residentially, they're over the above market, but commercially, we have instant equity built into ours. So the smart
Right.
investors, the ones that know what they're doing, are able to invest in the first property and literally use no more money to piggyback onto the second one as soon as the first one's completed,
Mhm.
right? So there
Nice.
is a smart way to do it, but
Yeah.
you need to understand the difference between commercial and residential and be ready to play in a hybrid space between them.
Right. So that sounds complex in itself.
Yes, yes. So it's not a new investor product. Honestly, most people, my perfect client for this kind of investing is typically third or fourth property purchases.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So you want to have considerable investments behind you before even considering this
yeah,
sort of investment
yeah,
because, like you said, it's high risk, high return, but you need to make sure that you know what you're doing in order to get to that
yeah.
success.
And we're getting returns of after management fees, 12 to 15% every single day of the week rental
Yeah,
return,
nice.
which is great.
Fantastic.
For most people, that one or two of those properties could set you up financially free, but it needs to
Mhm.
make sure that it's done the right way. And just like you guys do as mentoring with your team,
Yeah.
which is so valuable, It's the same thing that, whoever invests in NDIS property needs to do the research on who they're dealing with.
Absolutely. Always do due diligence. Make sure you know who you're dealing with. 100%. That's what it comes down to, and it's as simple as that. 2-star versus 5-star.
Yeah.
Know the difference.
That's right.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us here tonight, Goro. I really appreciate you. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Like I said, we'll have to get you back for a part 2 because there's so much more that we need to cover. But we
That's
have
right.
run out of time
More
tonight.
cans of worms.
Definitely more cans of worms to open up there. Thank you so much. We've got to head on over to our private group now. So we will say good night and see you on the flip side.
See you guys later.
Thanks, guys. Have a great night. Bye-bye.